The bankrupt billionaire took his driver to an important meeting, but what the driver said in the meeting left everyone shocked. Jack Miller adjusted the rearview mirror of the luxurious black car, observing his reflection with a mixture of resignation and determination. At 32 years old, his face still showed traces of the ambitious young man he once was, but his eyes reflected a maturity acquired through pain and disillusionment. 5 years ago, Jack had been one of the most promising financial analysts in the city. His rising career had led him to work alongside Mr. Richard Foster, a respected businessman known for his integrity and vision. Under his mentorship, Jack had not only honed his financial skills, but had also learned the value of ethics in business. However, everything changed on that fateful October afternoon. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, vividly remembering the scene: federal agents bursting into the offices, accusations of fraud, the look of disbelief on Mr. Foster's face as he was handcuffed and led away before news cameras. The fall of Richard Foster was a scandal that shook the financial world. Accused of embezzlement and large-scale fraud, the once respected businessman was sentenced to prison, his reputation destroyed, his fortune confiscated. But Jack knew the truth. In the days following the arrest, working tirelessly through mountains of documents and financial records, he had discovered the true architect of Mr. Foster's ruin, Laura Harrison, an unscrupulous investor who had meticulously orchestrated the businessman's downfall to seize his assets. Armed with evidence, Jack had tried to clear his mentor's name, but Laura Harrison's power and influence were vast. His attempts were blocked at every turn, evidence misplaced, witnesses silenced. Frustrated and disillusioned by a system that seemed to favor the corrupt, Jack made a drastic decision to completely abandon the world of finance. Now, 5 years later, Jack found himself behind the wheel of a luxury car, but not as the owner, rather as the driver for Mr. Alexander Parker, owner of Parker Industries, a company that was once prosperous but now teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. Mr. Parker was an old-school businessman, proud and stubborn, who resisted admitting the gravity of his company's financial situation. Jack, from his position as a driver, had observed with growing concern the signs of decline: tense meetings, frantic phone calls, Mr. Parker's heavy sighs every time he left his office. That morning, as he drove towards Parker Industries' headquarters, Jack noticed unusual agitation. Executives in impeccable suits were entering and leaving the building, their tense faces reflecting the importance of the day ahead. "Looks like today's the big day, Jack?" Mr. Parker commented from the back seat, his voice trying to sound carefree, but betrayed by a slight tremor. Jack nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Would you like me to wait for you after the meeting?" "That won't be necessary," Mr. Parker replied, massaging his temples. "This could take hours. I'll call you when it's over." As he parked in front of the imposing glass and steel building, Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. In another life, he would have been one of those executives, preparing for a crucial meeting. Now his role was limited to opening the door for his boss and observing from afar. "Have a good day, sir," Jack said, holding the door open as Mr. Parker got out of the car. The businessman paused for a moment, looking at Jack with a mixture of weariness and gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. Sometimes I think you're the only one I can trust these days." With those words, Mr. Parker walked away, his shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of the worries he carried. Jack watched him enter the building, a sense of unease growing in his chest. Little did Jack know that on that day, fate had prepared a surprise for him that would force him to confront his past and would change the course of his life forever. As he prepared to wait in the car, not imagining that he would soon be embroiled in a plot of power, greed, and redemption, the clock marked the beginning of a day that would shake the foundations of Parker Industries and challenge everything Jack thought he knew about himself and the world he had left behind. The midday sun fell relentlessly on the parking lot of Parker Industries when Jack's phone vibrated urgently. It was a message from Mr. Parker. "Come to the boardroom immediately. Bring the black briefcase from the trunk. It's urgent." With his heart racing, Jack rushed to comply with the order. In his 5 years as a driver, he had never been called to a meeting. As he rode up in the elevator, with the heavy briefcase in hand, he couldn't help but feel that he was about to cross an invisible line he had drawn in his life. Upon reaching the executive floor, Jack found himself in a scene of palpable tension. Executives with somber faces were moving through the corridors, whispering among themselves. Mr. Parker's secretary, a normally composed woman, seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Jack, thank God you're here," she exclaimed upon seeing him. "Mr. Parker is waiting for that briefcase. It's the last hope to save the company." With a lump in his throat, Jack nodded and headed towards the imposing oak door of the boardroom. He took a deep breath and, reminding himself that he was just the driver, knocked softly. "Come in." Mr. Parker's voice sounded tense, almost desperate. As he entered, Jack found himself facing a scene that seemed taken from his days as a financial analyst. The long mahogany table was surrounded by men and women in suits, all with expressions ranging from concern to hostility. At the head, Mr. Parker seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of hours. But what really caught Jack's attention, what made his blood run cold, was the woman seated at the other end of the table. With her perfectly styled black hair and designer suit, Laura Harrison exuded an aura of power and confidence that contrasted brutally with the atmosphere of desperation that surrounded her. For an instant, time seemed to stand still. Laura's eyes met Jack's, and for a second, a flash of recognition crossed her face, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating smile. "Ah, the driver," she said in a condescending tone. "How quaint for him to join us." Jack felt his hands trembling as he handed the briefcase to Mr. Parker. His mind was working at full speed, trying to process the situation. What was Laura Harrison doing here? Was she planning to do to Parker Industries what she had done to Mr. Foster's company? "Thank you, Jack," Mr. Parker muttered, opening the briefcase with trembling fingers. "You can leave now." But Jack didn't move. He couldn't, not when he saw the same scene unfolding before his eyes, the same trap that had destroyed his mentor years ago. "Mr. Parker," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I think you should know—" "Know what?" Laura interrupted, her voice sharp as a knife. What could a mere driver possibly contribute to this discussion? It was at that moment, under the incredulous and contemptuous looks of those present, that Jack made a decision that would change the course of his life and the fate of Parker Industries. "That you're about to make a grave mistake," he declared, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Laura Harrison is not who she claims to be. She's a con artist, a woman who destroyed the life of an honest man and is about to do the same here." A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Mr. Parker looked at Jack with a mixture of surprise and indignation. "Jack, have you lost your mind? Mrs. Harrison is our last hope to save the company." Laura, for her part, maintained her composure. Although her eyes shone with barely contained fury, "Mr. Parker, I suggest you remove your employee from here before he says something we'll all regret." But Jack had already crossed the point of no return. With a calmness he didn't know he possessed, he began to unearth the past he had tried so hard to forget. He spoke of Richard Foster, of the financial manipulations, of the evidence he had gathered and that had been ignored. "I have copies of all the documents," he declared, looking directly at Laura. "Evidence that shows how you manipulated the books, how you bribed officials, how you destroyed a solid company for your personal benefit." The room erupted into chaos of voices. Some executives demanded that Jack be removed. Others asked to see the evidence. Mr. Parker, pale and shocked, alternated his gaze between Jack and Laura as if he were witnessing a particularly intense tennis match. Laura, for her part, maintained her facade of calm, although a nervous tick in her cheek betrayed her composure. "These are very serious accusations, Mr. What was your name?" "Miller," Jack replied, holding her gaze. "Jack Miller. And you're right. They are very serious accusations, so serious that I'm willing to present all the evidence to the appropriate authorities." Mr. Parker, regaining some of his authority, stood up. This is madness. Jack, you've worked for me for years. Why did you never mention any of this?" Jack felt the weight of all eyes on him. This was the moment of truth. Because I left that world behind, sir, or at least I thought I had, but I can't stand idly by while I see history repeating itself. Laura, seeing that the situation was slipping out of her hands, tried to regain control. Gentlemen, this is clearly a desperate attempt by this employee to sabotage a crucial negotiation. I suggest we ignore him and continue with our business. But the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Mr. Parker, after a moment of indecision, made a decision that surprised everyone, including Jack. This meeting is suspended until further notice, he declared firmly. Jack, I want to see that evidence. Now. As the room emptied amidst murmurs and confused looks, Jack found himself alone, facing Mr. Parker and Laura Harrison. The air was charged with tension, and Jack knew that what happened in the next few hours would determine not only his future, but that of Parker Industries and possibly many other people. Laura, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, stood up. "This isn't over, Miller," she whispered as she passed by him. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Jack watched her leave, aware that he had just made a powerful enemy. But for the first time in years, he also felt something he thought he had lost: hope. Turning to Mr. Parker, who was looking at him with a mixture of confusion and expectation, Jack knew it was time to tell the whole truth. The story he was about to reveal would not only change the course of Parker Industries, but would trigger a series of events that would shake the business world to its foundations. Mr. Parker's office, normally a sanctuary of calm and order, had become the epicenter of a storm. Piles of documents covered every available surface, and the air was charged with the aroma of strong coffee and palpable tension. Jack, with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, leaned over the desk, pointing out figures and transactions in the scattered papers. Mr. Parker, for his part, listened with a mixture of amazement and growing indignation. "Do you see this transfer, sir?" Jack pointed to a particular line. "It seems harmless, but it's part of a pattern. Laura Harrison has been systematically diverting funds, hiding it under the guise of legitimate investments." Mr. Parker took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "My God, Jack, how did we not notice this before?" "Because she's very good at what she does," Jack replied bitterly. "She uses a network of shell companies and complex transactions to hide the money trail. It's the same method she used to bring down Richard Foster." The name seemed to awaken something in Mr. Parker. "Foster, the one who went to prison for fraud a few years ago." Jack nodded, his face darkening. "Yes, but he was innocent. Laura orchestrated his downfall, and I couldn't do anything to prevent it." Mr. Parker remained silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he was discovering. Finally, he looked up at Jack, his eyes shining with a mixture of determination and gratitude. "Jack, you've saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. But now, what do we do?" Before Jack could respond, the office door burst open. Emily Parker, Mr. Parker's daughter and vice president of the company, entered like a whirlwind. "Dad, what's going on? Everyone is talking about what happened in the meeting. Is it true that the driver—" She stopped short upon seeing Jack standing next to her father, surrounded by documents. "Emily," Mr. Parker said with a tired but firm voice, "sit down. There's a lot you need to know." Over the next hour, Jack and Mr. Parker brought Emily up to speed on the situation. The young executive listened with growing horror and amazement, her sharp mind quickly processing the implications of what she was hearing. "It's incredible," Emily muttered when they finished. She turned to Jack, her eyes shining with a new light of respect. "All this time, I thought you were just a simple driver," Jack completed with a sad smile. "I was by my own choice. And honestly, there were times when it was easier to be just the driver, less complicated." "And now?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. "Now?" Jack paused, searching for the right words. "Now I feel like I'm where I should be, doing what I should do." Before Emily could respond, the door opened abruptly. It was Mr. Parker, his face a mixture of emotion and concern. "Jack, Emily, you need to see this," he said, turning on the office TV. On the screen, a news reporter was standing in front of Parker Industries offices. Anonymous sources have revealed that Parker Industries, one of the largest companies in the country, could be involved in a financial scandal of epic proportions. It is rumored that renowned investor Laura Harrison is behind these accusations. So far, neither the company nor Mrs. Harrison have made official comments. Jack felt his blood run cold. "She's counter-attacking," he muttered, "trying to discredit us before we can expose the truth." Mr. Parker turned off the TV, his face grim. "This is bad. If we don't do something soon, the company's reputation will be destroyed." "We need help," said Emily, her mind working at full speed. "Someone who knows the media game, who can help us control the narrative." Jack remained still for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. I think I know someone who could help us, but it's complicated." "Who?" Mr. Parker and Emily asked in unison. "Kathy Vega," Jack replied. "She's an investigative journalist. She worked on Richard Foster's case years ago. She was the only one who believed in his innocence, but she couldn't prove it." "And you think she would help us?" Mr. Parker asked, hopeful. Jack nodded slowly. "If we show her what we have, if we give her the chance to expose the truth she couldn't years ago, yes, I think she would." "Do it," Mr. Parker ordered. "Contact her. Offer her whatever is necessary." As Jack searched for Kathy's number on his phone, Emily watched him with a new light of respect and something else, something she couldn't quite define. Across town, in her luxurious office, Laura Harrison smiled with satisfaction as she watched the news on her flat-screen TV. Her plan to discredit Parker Industries was underway. Little did she know that at that very moment, an alliance was forming that would threaten to destroy her entire empire of lies. And in a modest newsroom, Kathy Vega's phone began to ring. The journalist looked at the unknown number curiously, not imagining that this call was about to offer her the story of her life and the opportunity to correct an injustice that had tormented her for years. The board was set, the pieces in motion. The battle for the truth, justice, and the future of Parker Industries was about to enter a new and dangerous phase. The following morning dawned with an electrifying energy at Parker Industries offices. The hallways buzzed with rumors and speculation as employees tried to decipher the events of the previous day. At the center of this whirlwind, Jack found himself in a surreal situation. He was no longer the invisible driver, but the focus of attention. Offering him one of the cups, "I imagine it's been an interesting morning." Jack accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "Interesting is an understatement. 24 hours ago, I was worried about the oil level in your father's car. Now I'm unraveling years of financial fraud." Emily sat down across from him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "How do you do it? How can you stay calm in the midst of all this?" Jack let out a soft laugh. "Believe me, inside I'm as nervous as everyone else, but I learned a long time ago that panic solves nothing. We can only move forward, one step at a time." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, broken only by Jack's soft typing on the computer. Emily observed him working, noticing for the first time the intensity of his gaze, the way his forehead wrinkled slightly when he concentrated. "Jack," she finally said, "I want to apologize." He looked up, surprised. "Apologize? For what?" "For how I treated you before, for underestimating you. We saw you as just the driver, and that wasn't right." Jack looked at her for a moment, touched by her sincerity. "Emily, you don't have to apologize. I chose that role. And honestly, there were times when it was easier to be just the driver, less complicated." "And now?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. "Now?" Jack paused, searching for the right words. "So now I feel like I'm where I should be, doing what I should do." Before Emily could respond, the door burst open. It was Mr. Parker, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Jack, Emily, you have to see this," he said, turning on the office TV. On the screen, a news reporter was standing in front of Parker Industries offices. Anonymous sources have revealed that Parker Industries, one of the largest companies in the country, could be involved in a financial scandal of epic proportions. It is rumored that renowned investor Laura Harrison is behind these accusations. So far, neither the company nor Mrs. Harrison have made official comments. Jack felt his blood run cold. "She's counterattacking," he muttered, "trying to discredit us before we can expose the truth." Mr. Parker turned off the TV, his face grim. "This is bad. If we don't do something soon, the company's reputation will be destroyed." "We need help," said Emily, her mind working at full speed. "Someone who knows the media game, who can help us control the narrative." Jack remained still for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. I think I know someone who could help us, but it's complicated." "Who?" Mr. Parker and Emily asked in unison. "Kathy Vega," Jack replied. "She's an investigative journalist. She worked on Richard Foster's case years ago. She was the only one who believed in his innocence, but she couldn't prove it." "And you think she would help us?" Mr. Parker asked, hopeful. Jack nodded slowly. "If we show her what we have, if we give her the chance to expose the truth she couldn't years ago, yes, I think she would." "Do it," Mr. Parker ordered. "Contact her. Offer her whatever is necessary." As Jack searched for Kathy's number on his phone, Emily watched him with a new light of respect and something else, something she couldn't quite define. Across town, in her luxurious office, Laura Harrison smiled with satisfaction as she watched the news on her flat-screen TV. Her plan to discredit Parker Industries was underway. Little did she know that at that very moment, an alliance was forming that would threaten to destroy her entire empire of lies. And in a modest newsroom, Kathy Vega's phone began to ring. The journalist looked at the unknown number curiously, not imagining that this call was about to offer her the story of her life and the opportunity to correct an injustice that had tormented her for years. The board was set, the pieces in motion. The battle for the truth, justice, and the future of Parker Industries was about to enter a new and dangerous phase. The coffee shop on the corner bustled with activity, the aroma of freshly brewed espresso mixing with the murmur of hurried conversations. At a table in the back, partially hidden by a large ornamental plant, Jack waited nervously, his fingers drumming on the cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Every time the door opened, he looked up with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Finally, a middle-aged woman with brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and sharp eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses entered the place. Her gaze scanned the room until it fixed on Jack. Kathy Vega approached the table with a determined step, her expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Jack Miller?" she asked. Though it was more of a statement than a question, Jack stood up, extending his hand. "Miss Vega, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Kathy sat down, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. "I must admit that your call intrigued me, Mr. Miller. It's not every day that I receive a mysterious invitation to discuss the story of the century, so..." Jack smiled nervously. "I assure you I wasn't exaggerating. What I'm about to show you, it will change many things." Over the next hour, Jack presented Kathy with a detailed summary of everything they had discovered: Laura Harrison's financial manipulations, the connection to Richard Foster's case, and how it all intertwined with Parker Industries' current situation. As he spoke, Jack could see how Kathy's expression changed from initial disbelief to intense interest, and finally, to fierce determination. This is monumental," said Kathy when Jack finished. "If we can prove all this, we wouldn't just exonerate Richard Foster, but we'd expose one of the biggest corporate fraud schemes in the country's history. That's why we need you, Mrs. Vega. You have the experience and contacts to help us tell this story the right way. Laura Harrison is already moving her pieces, trying to discredit us. We need to act fast." Kathy leaned back in her chair, her mind working at full speed. "This won't be easy. Laura Harrison has powerful connections, friends in high places. They'll try to silence us by any means possible." "I know," Jack replied, his voice tinged with determination. "But this time, we have something we didn't have before: concrete evidence and allies willing to fight." Kathy nodded slowly, a spark of excitement shining in her eyes. "All right, I'm in, but we'll need more than just documents and testimonies. We'll need a solid media strategy." "Count on it," said Jack. "Mr. Parker and his daughter Emily are committed to doing whatever it takes to expose the truth." As they discussed the details of their plan, neither of them noticed the solitary figure sitting at a nearby table, partially hidden behind a newspaper. The man lowered the newspaper slightly, revealing cold, calculating eyes. With a discreet movement, he took out his phone and sent a message. "The journalist is involved. Proceed with Plan B." Back at Parker Industries' offices, Emily paced back and forth in the conference room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. Mr. Parker, seated at the head of the table, reviewed a stack of documents with a furrowed brow. "Dad," Emily said, suddenly stopping, "what if we're underestimating Laura? What if she has an ace up her sleeve that we haven't considered?" Mr. Parker looked up, his eyes tired but determined. "It's possible, honey. That's why we need to be prepared for any eventuality." At that moment, the door opened and Jack entered, followed closely by Kathy Vega. Emily felt an inexplicable flutter in her stomach at the sight of Jack, but quickly attributed it to the tension of the moment. "Mr. Parker, Emily B.," said Jack, "let me introduce you to Kathy Vega. She has agreed to help us." The introductions were brief but cordial. Soon, the group was immersed in an intense discussion, drawing up plans and considering all the possible ramifications of their actions. "We must be cautious," Kathy warned. "Laura Harrison won't hesitate to use dirty tactics. She might try to discredit us personally, dig into our pasts for anything she can use against us." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. His past, though not shameful, was full of pain and loss. The idea that Laura could use that against him turned his stomach. Emily, noticing Jack's somber expression, felt a sudden impulse to protect him. "No matter what she tries," she said firmly, "we'll be prepared. We're stronger together." Jack gave her a grateful smile, and for a moment their gazes met, communicating more than words could express. Mr. Parker, oblivious to the silent exchange between his daughter and Jack, stood up. "Well, then it's decided. Tomorrow we begin our counteroffensive. Kathy, prepare the first article. Emily, coordinate with our legal team. Jack." Before he could finish, the door burst open. It was Martinez, the head of security, his face pale and worried. "Sir, we have a problem," he said breathlessly. "Someone has hacked our servers. They're leaking confidential information online." Chaos erupted in the room. While Mr. Parker and Emily rushed to assess the damage, Jack stood paralyzed, a terrible realization hitting him. "It's my fault," he muttered. "I should have foreseen this. Laura is one step ahead." Kathy, noticing his distress, put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, Jack. This only shows how desperate Laura is. She's making mistakes, and mistakes leave trails." As the team struggled to contain the crisis, in her luxurious penthouse, Laura Harrison watched with satisfaction as news of the leak spread like wildfire on social media. Her plan was working perfectly, or so she thought. What Laura didn't know was that at that very moment, in a modest office in the financial district, a young analyst named Charlie Rodriguez was noticing some irregularities in the leaked data. Irregularities that, if investigated further, could lead directly to Laura's doorstep. The storm that was brewing was bigger and more complex than any of those involved could imagine. And at the heart of it all, Jack Miller found himself at a crossroads. The decisions he would make in the next few hours would determine not only his future, but that of everyone around him. Night fell over the city, bringing with it a deceptive calm. At Parker Industries' offices, the lights remained on, silent witnesses to the battle being waged within. A battle that was about to reach epic proportions. Dawn arrived with a mixture of exhaustion and determination at Parker Industries' offices. Jack, with his shirt wrinkled and hair disheveled, rubbed his tired eyes as he reviewed the leaked data for the umpteenth time, searching for any clue that could give them an advantage. Beside him, Emily worked tirelessly, her face illuminated by the computer screen. Occasionally, their gazes would cross. sharing a silent understanding of the weight of the situation. "I think I found something," Jack muttered, leaning closer to the screen. Emily moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his, sending an electric current through his body that both tried to ignore. "Look at this," Jack continued, pointing to a series of transactions. "These transfers, they don't match the original records we had. Someone modified them before leaking them." Emily's eyes widened. "That means that we have proof of manipulation," Jack completed, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "Laura didn't just leak information, she altered it. And she made a mistake in doing so." At that moment, Kathy Vega entered the office, holding her phone with a shocked expression. "You have to see this," she said, showing them the screen. It was a viral video that was spreading across social media. In it, a hooded figure with a distorted voice spoke directly to the camera. "Citizens, the truth speaks to you. Parker. Industries is not the victim it claims to be. I have evidence of their corruption, of their dirty deals, and there's more. Jack Miller, the supposed hero of this story, has dark secrets. Did you know he abandoned his mentor, Richard Foster, in his darkest hour? That he fled like a coward instead of fighting for the truth?" Jack felt the ground open beneath his feet. All the insecurities and guilt he had buried for years resurfaced forcefully. Emily, seeing the pain in Jack's eyes, acted on instinct. She took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I don't believe them, Jack. We know who you really are." Kathy turned off the video, her face a mask of determination. "This is low, even for Laura, but we can use it to our advantage. Her desperation is making her make mistakes." Before they could elaborate on a plan, Mr. Parker entered the office, on his face somber. "We have a bigger problem. The board of directors is considering removing me. Prepare an explosive article with everything we've discovered, and I'm going to face my demons once and for all." "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, a mixture of admiration and concern in her voice. "I'm going to visit Richard Foster in prison," Jack replied. "It's time for the truth to come out, the whole truth." As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Jack remained alone with Emily for a moment. "Thank you," he said softly. "Sorry for believing in me." Emily looked into his eyes, a whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Always," she simply replied, before quickly leaving the office, leaving Jack with a racing heart and a mind full of possibilities. Meanwhile, in her luxurious penthouse, Laura Harrison received an unexpected call. "What do you mean there are discrepancies in the leaked data?" she yelled into the phone. "Fix it. I don't care how, but do it. We can't allow—" She stopped abruptly upon noticing a shadow at the entrance to her office. There, with a cold smile, was Charlie Rodriguez, the young analyst who had discovered the irregularities. "Good evening, Mrs. Harrison," he said with a chilling calm. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Laura felt the ground move beneath her feet. For the first time in years, she experienced an emotion she thought she had forgotten: fear. The storm that was brewing was about to turn into a hurricane, and no one was prepared for the revelations and betrayals that were about to come. At the heart of it all, Jack Miller was heading towards an encounter that would change not only his life, but the course of this entire story. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it the promise of a new day, and with it, the moment of truth for all involved. The final battle was about to begin, and only the strongest and most honest would survive the approaching storm. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Jack arrived at the state prison. The grey, gloomy building loomed before him like a physical reminder of past mistakes. With each step he took towards the entrance, he felt the weight of the years accumulating on his shoulders. After passing through rigorous security checks, Jack was led to a small visiting room. The guard indicated that he should wait, and minutes later, the door opened again. Richard Foster entered the room, his figure a shadow of what he once was. His hair, once jet black, was now sprinkled with grey. The wrinkles on his face told the story of years of injustice and desperation. But his eyes, those eyes that had once inspired Jack to be better, still shone with a spark of indomitable determination. "Jack," said Richard, his voice hoarse from lack of use. After all these years, Jack stood up, fighting the urge to hug the man who had once been like a father to him. Mr. Foster, I'm so sorry. I should have come sooner. I should have fought harder. Richard raised a hand, silencing Jack's apologies. There's no need to apologize, son. I know you did everything you could. They sat across from each other, the silence laden with years of unspoken words and actions not taken. I'm here because I finally have a chance to make things right, Jack began. We have evidence, Mr. Foster. Evidence that will not only exonerate you, but will expose Laura Harrison for who she really is. Richard's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and caution. Are you sure, Jack? Laura is powerful. She has connections everywhere. Jack nodded with determination. I know, and it won't be easy. But this time I'm not alone. We have a team, powerful allies. And most importantly, we have the truth on our side. Over the next hour, Jack told Richard everything that had happened. How he had discovered the connection between Laura and the crisis at Parker Industries, how Mr. Parker and Emily had become unexpected allies, and how Kathy Vega was helping them expose the truth. Richard listened attentively, his expression changing from surprise to concern and, finally, to iron resolve. Jack, he said finally, what you're doing is dangerous. Laura will stop at nothing to protect herself, but if what you're saying is true, if you really have the evidence, then perhaps, after all these years, justice will finally be served. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The implicit forgiveness in Richard's words was like a balm to his tormented soul. There's something else I need to tell you, Jack continued, his voice trembling slightly. The video, the one Laura leaked, it says I abandoned you, that I fled like a coward. Richard frowned. That's ridiculous. You were the only one who kept fighting when everyone else gave up. But I left, Jack insisted, emotions repressed for years finally coming to the surface. I stopped visiting, I stopped trying. I gave up on you, on everything. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Jack's. Listen to me carefully, son. You didn't give up. I asked you to leave. Remember, I told you to live your life, not to waste your youth fighting a battle that seemed lost. If there's a coward here, it's me for not having the strength to keep fighting. Richard's words hit Jack like a wave, washing away years of guilt and remorse. For the first time in a long time, he felt he could breathe freely. Now, Richard continued with a determined smile, tell me more about this plan of yours, and about this Emily. It seems there's more than just business there, huh? Jack couldn't help but blush, which elicited a genuine laugh from Richard, a sound neither of them had heard in years. Meanwhile, at Parker Industries offices, Emily worked frantically, coordinating with the legal team and preparing the strategy for the imminent press conference. However, her mind kept drifting to Jack, wondering how his meeting with Richard Foster was going. Mr. Parker entered the office, his face showing signs of fatigue but also determination. How are we doing, honey? Emily gave him a quick summary of the situation, ending with, Dad, do you think we're doing the right thing? What if all this goes wrong? Mr. Parker put a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. Sometimes, Emily, doing the right thing is the hardest, but it's the only thing that will allow us to look in the mirror with pride at the end of the day. At that moment, Kathy Vega burst into the office, her face lit up with a mixture of excitement and urgency. We have something big, she announced. One of my contacts in the financial world, Charlie Rodriguez, just sent me a bombshell of information. It seems he's been working undercover, investigating Laura Harrison for months. Mr. Parker and Emily drew closer as Kathy spread a series of documents across the desk. This is incredible, Emily muttered as she reviewed the information. With this, we can not only save Parker Industries, but we can sink Laura's entire corrupt empire. We must act with caution, Mr. Parker warned. Laura still has powerful allies. If we move too quickly, they might try to silence us. That's why we need to make it public, Kathy interjected. Once this information is in the hands of the press and the public, it will be impossible to contain. As they discussed the next steps, Jack returned from the prison. As he entered the office, everyone noticed the change in his demeanor. There was a new light in his eyes, a renewed determination in his posture. How did it go? Emily asked softly, approaching him. Jack looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "It was liberating," he replied. "Richard is with us, and I have more reasons than ever to see this through to the end." The group gathered around the table, each contributing their piece of the puzzle. With Charlie's information, Richard's testimony, the evidence gathered by Jack and the team, and Kathy's journalistic skills, they had a solid case against Laura Harrison and her accomplices. "Well," said Mr. Parker, his voice loaded with resolution, "it's time to set everything in motion. Emily, coordinate with the public relations team. I want that press conference ready for tomorrow at noon. Kathy, prepare the most explosive article of your career. Jack." He paused, looking at the young man who had gone from being a simple driver to becoming the heart of this battle. "Jack, I need you to be by my side when we make the announcement. You're living proof that integrity and perseverance can triumph over corruption." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the strength that came from knowing he was doing the right thing. As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Emily stayed behind for a moment. "Jack," she said softly, "I want you to know that, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you, of us, of what we're doing." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. There was so much they wanted to say to each other, but still couldn't express in words. Finally, Jack took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "Together," he said simply. "Together," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. As night fell over the city, the team worked tirelessly, preparing for the day that would change everything. In her luxurious penthouse, Laura Harrison was also preparing, unaware that her empire was about to crumble. The stage was set for the final act of this drama. Tomorrow, when the sun rose, the battle that would determine the fate of all involved would begin, and at the center of it all, Jack Miller found himself ready to face his destiny, with truth as his shield and justice as his sword. The morning dawned with a palpable tension in the air. The first rays of sun filtered through the blinds of Parker Industries' main office, where Jack, Emily, Mr. Parker, and Kathy Vega were making final preparations for the press conference that was about to change the course of their lives. Jack, dressed in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big for him, adjusted his tie in front of a mirror. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the nerves he was trying to hide. Emily approached him, her reflection appearing next to his in the mirror. "Let me help you with that," she said softly, turning him to face her and adjusting his tie with expert hands. Being so close, Jack could notice the small freckles on the bridge of her nose, the slight tremor in her eyelashes. For a moment, the outside world disappeared. "Emily, Jack began, but was interrupted by Mr. Parker's voice. "It's time," he announced, his voice laden with determination. "The conference room is full. All the major media outlets are present." Kathy Vega, who had been reviewing her notes one last time, stood up. "Remember the plan, Mr. Parker. You'll open the conference. Then, Jack will present the evidence. I'll be ready to answer questions and provide journalistic context. Emily, you'll handle any legal or financial questions." Everyone nodded, the gravity of the moment reflected in their faces. Before leaving the office, Mr. Parker gathered them in a circle, like a sports team before the decisive game. "Whatever happens today," he said, looking each of them in the eye, "I want you to know that I'm proud of all of you. We have fought with honor and truth. Now, let's change the course of history." Meanwhile, in her luxurious penthouse, Laura Harrison was preparing for her own battle. Dressed in an impeccable black suit, she frantically reviewed her phone, sending messages and making last-minute calls. "I don't care how you do it," she hissed to one of her allies, "but I need you to discredit Jack Miller before that press conference is over. Use the video, use his past, use whatever is necessary." However, a shadow of doubt crossed her face when she saw a message from an unknown number. "The truth always comes to light, Laura. It's time for you to pay for your crimes. C.R." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. Who was C.R.? And what did they know? Back at Parker Industries, the team was heading towards the conference room. Jack could hear the murmur of the crowd on the other side of the doors, journalists, executives, curious onlookers, all waiting to witness what promised to be the revelation of the year. Just before entering, Emily took Jack's hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. "We're in this together," she whispered. "No matter what happens." Jack nodded, grateful for her presence, for her strength. With one last deep breath, the group entered the room. The flash of cameras momentarily blinded them. The noise of the crowd intensified upon seeing them enter, and then calmed when Mr. Parker approached the podium. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice firm and clear. "We have called you here today to reveal a truth that has remained hidden for too long, a truth that will expose years of corruption, manipulation, and fraud at the highest levels of the business world." As Mr. Parker continued his introduction, Jack scanned the crowd. His heart skipped a beat when, in the last row, he saw a familiar figure. Richard Foster, recently released on bail thanks to the new evidence, was there, offering him a supportive smile. And now I give the floor to someone who has been at the center of this story from the beginning, a man who had the courage to stand up to the powerful and fight for the truth. Jack Miller. With trembling legs but determination in his gaze, Jack approached the podium. He looked at the crowd, then at Emily, who offered him an encouraging nod, and finally at Richard Foster, whose presence reminded him why he was there. "My name is Jack Miller," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "And I'm here to tell you a story of greed, of betrayal, but also of redemption and justice." As Jack spoke, revealing proof after proof, document after document, the room filled with gasps and murmurs of amazement. He meticulously exposed Laura Harrison's corrupt scheme, how she had manipulated markets, ruined lives, and built an empire on lies. In her penthouse, Laura Harrison watched the live broadcast, her face growing paler with each revelation. Her frantic calls to allies and lawyers went unanswered. The empire she had so carefully built was crumbling before her eyes. Back at the press conference, Jack was reaching the climax of his presentation, and finally, he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I want to talk about Richard Foster, an innocent man, imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit, a victim of Laura Harrison's manipulation. Today, we not only expose the truth about Parker Industries, but we also clear the name of an honorable man." The room erupted into a tumult of questions and exclamations. Kathy Vega took control, answering questions and providing context, while Emily handled the more technical and legal inquiries. As the controlled chaos unfolded around him, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Richard Foster, with tears in his eyes. "You did it, son," he said with a broken voice. "After all these years, justice has finally been served." Jack, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged the man who had been like a father to him. "We did it together," he replied. At that moment, the doors of the room burst open. Everyone turned to see Laura Harrison escorted by 2 police officers. Her face, normally composed, showed a mixture of fury and defeat. "Laura Harrison," announced one of the officers, his voice resonating in the sudden silence of the room, "you are under arrest for fraud, market manipulation, and obstruction of justice." As Laura was escorted out of the room, her eyes met Jack's. For a moment, he saw in them not only hatred, but also a flash of reluctant respect. She had underestimated the simple driver, and that had been her downfall. With Laura out of the picture, attention turned back to Jack and the Parker Industries team. The camera flashes intensified, and the murmur of the crowd grew into a roar of questions and exclamations. Mr. Parker, sensing the need for control, approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We will answer all your questions in order." As Mr. Parker and Kathy Vega handled the avalanche of questions from journalists, Jack found himself momentarily on the sidelines of the chaos. It was then that he felt a warm hand slip into his. It was Emily. "You did it," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something neither of them dared to name yet. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "We did it," he corrected. "To all of us." For a moment, the world seemed to fade around them. They were so close that Jack could count the freckles on Emily's nose bridge, could see the slight tremor in her lips. Almost without realizing it, They leaned towards each other. "Jack," Mr. Parker's voice pulled them out of their bubble. "We need you here for some questions." Blushing slightly, Jack and Emily separated, aware that they had been about to cross a line at the least appropriate moment and place. The next few hours were a whirlwind of questions, statements, and revelations. Jack, with the help of Emily and Kathy, meticulously broke down every aspect of Laura's fraud, explaining how they had discovered the truth and what this meant for the future of Parker Industries and the business world in general. As the press conference came to an end, it became clear that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. Laura Harrison's fall had opened a Pandora's box, exposing a network of corruption that extended far beyond a single company or individual. When they finally left the podium, exhausted but triumphant, they were greeted by a standing ovation. Journalists, executives, and even competitors approached to congratulate them and offer their support. Amidst the crowd, Jack saw Richard Foster, surrounded by old friends and colleagues who had come to apologize and celebrate his exoneration. The old man gestured for Jack to approach. "Son," said Richard, his voice laden with emotion, "I can't express how proud I am of you. You've done more than clear my name. You've restored faith in justice and integrity in business." Jack, overwhelmed, hugged his mentor. "Thank you for not losing hope, Mr. Foster, for teaching me the value of perseverance and honesty." As they separated, Richard looked over Jack's shoulder and smiled. "And it seems you've gained more than just a professional victory," he said with a wink, nodding towards Emily, who was watching them from afar with a warm smile. Jack blushed, but before he could respond, Mr. Parker joined them. "Jack, Mr. Foster," he said, his voice laden with gratitude and respect. "And I think we have a lot to discuss about the future. What do you say we continue this conversation in my office?" As they headed towards the exit, Jack found himself walking alongside Emily. The brush of their hands, the exchange of complicit glances, all spoke of a future full of possibilities that they were just beginning to glimpse. However, as they advanced through the corridors of Parker Industries, Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. They had won a crucial battle, but the war against corruption was far from over. What challenges awaited them? Would they be prepared to face them? As they rode the elevator up to Mr. Parker's office, Jack looked at the faces around him. Emily, with her unwavering determination, Mr. Parker, whose integrity had prevailed over adversity, Richard Foster, a living symbol of redemption, and Kathy Vega, whose relentless pursuit of truth had been fundamental to their victory. With this team by his side, Jack felt they could face any challenge the future held for them. Truth had triumphed today, and with perseverance and unity, it would continue to triumph. The elevator doors opened, revealing a new horizon of possibilities. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came, with the certainty that he was no longer alone in his fight for justice. The days that followed the explosive press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Parker Industries found itself at the center of a media hurricane, with journalists camping outside the offices and the phone ringing non-stop. Jack, who until recently had been a simple driver, now found himself at the heart of the company's reconstruction. Mr. Parker, recognizing his integrity and ability, had offered him a position as a special advisor, working directly with him and Emily to implement new transparency and business ethics policies. One morning, as Jack was heading to his new office, it still felt strange to have one, he paused in front of a mirror in the hallway. The reflection that looked back at him was that of a transformed man. He was no longer the disillusioned young man who had fled the financial world years ago, nor the driver resigned to a life of anonymity. This Jack Miller radiated confidence and determination. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the secretary greeted him as he entered the main office. He still startled a bit every time someone called him that. "Good morning, Mary," he replied with a smile. "Is Mr. Parker available?" "He's on an important call, but he asked me to tell you to meet with Miss Emily in the conference room. They're reviewing proposals for the new ethics committee." Jack nodded and headed towards the conference room, his heart racing slightly at the prospect of seeing Emily. Since that near confession at the press conference, they had been working so closely that they had barely had time to address what was or could be between them. As he entered the room, he found Emily bent over a pile of documents, a strand of hair escaping from her usually impeccable bun. She looked up as she heard him enter, and a smile lit up her face. "Jack, glad you're here," she said, pointing to the chair beside her. "I need your opinion on these candidates for the Ethics Committee." As they reviewed the profiles, their hands accidentally brushed several times, sending sparks of electricity up their arms. Finally, Jack gathered the courage to address the elephant in the room. "Emily," he began, his voice deeper than he intended. "I think we should talk about us." Emily put down the papers she was holding and looked him directly in the eyes. "You're right," she said softly. "We've been avoiding this since the press conference." Just as Jack was about to speak, the door burst open. It was Mr. Parker, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Guys, we have news," he announced. "I just got a call from the district attorney's office. They're going to expand the investigation. It seems Laura Harrison's corruption network is more extensive than we thought." The romantic tension in the room instantly dissipated, replaced by a sense of professional urgency. "How extensive?" Jack asked, his mind already working on the implications. "Very extensive," Mr. Parker replied, handing them a file. "We're talking about politicians, judges, other CEOs. It's a nest of vipers. And we've disturbed it." Emily quickly leafed through the file, her face paling. This is huge, Dad. Are we prepared for the repercussions?" Mr. Parker sat heavily in a chair. "We'll have to be. We've come too far to back down now." Jack stood up, a new determination shining in his eyes. "Mr. Parker, Emily, I think we need to expand our team. This is bigger than Parker Industries now. We need allies in the media, in the government, in other companies that are willing to fight against corruption." Emily nodded, a smile of admiration forming on her lips. "Jack is right, Dad. We can turn this into a movement, a coalition for transparency and ethics in business." Mr. Parker looked at both of them, a mixture of pride and concern on his face. "You're talking about a revolution in the business world. Do you realize the risks?" Jack and Emily exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Jack spoke. "Mr. Parker, when we started this, we just wanted to save Parker Industries. But now I see that we have the opportunity, no, the responsibility to do something bigger, to change the system from within." Emily took her father's hand. "Dad, you always taught me to fight for what's right, regardless of the consequences. This is our chance to put that lesson into practice on a grand scale." Mr. Parker observed them for a long moment, seeing the determination in their faces. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "Let's do it. Let's change the world." As Mr. Parker left to make some calls, Jack and Emily were left alone again. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of professional excitement and personal tension. "Emily," Jack began, "I know this isn't the most appropriate time, but—" She interrupted him, putting a finger gently on his lips. "Jack, we're about to embark on the most dangerous and exciting adventure of our lives. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know one thing for certain. I want to face it with you by my side. Not just as colleagues, but as—" She left the sentence hanging, her eyes searching his. Jack felt his heart racing. "As a couple?" he completed softly. Emily's smile was all the answer he needed. Without saying another word, they leaned towards each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that had been brewing for weeks. When they finally separated, they both knew that something fundamental had changed. They were no longer just Jack and Emily, two individuals fighting against corruption. Now they were a team, united not only by a common purpose, but by a deeper and more personal bond. "Ready to change the world?" Jack asked, intertwining his fingers with hers. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything," Emily replied. Together, they left the conference room, ready to face the challenges that awaited them. The battle against corruption was just beginning. But with their love and determination as a guide, they knew they could overcome any obstacle. The future was uncertain, full of dangers and opportunities. But one thing was certain: Jack Miller, the former driver who had become the catalyst for monumental change, and Emily Parker, The heiress who had found her true calling in the fight for justice were prepared to face it together. As they walked through the corridors of Parker Industries, hand in hand, the sun filtered through the windows, bathing them in a golden light. It was the dawn of a new era, and they were at the center of it all. The following months were a whirlwind of activity for Jack, Emily, and the entire Parker Industries team. The investigation into Laura Harrison's corruption network had expanded, revealing connections at the highest levels of government and the business world. One afternoon, as Jack was reviewing some documents in his office, he received an urgent call from Kathy Vega. "Jack, I need to see you now," said the journalist, her voice laden with tension. "I have information that could change everything." Intrigued and slightly worried, Jack agreed to meet Kathy at a discreet Cafe C in the city center. Upon arriving, he found the journalist seated in a secluded corner, her eyes constantly scanning the place. "Kathy, what's going on?" Jack asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Kathy pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "This arrived at my office this morning. An anonymous envelope, no return address." Jack opened the folder cautiously, his eyes widening as he scanned its contents. Inside were documents, photographs, and transcripts of conversations that implicated prominent figures in government and the private sector in a corruption network that went far beyond Laura Harrison. "My God," Jack muttered. This is huge, Kathy. Have you verified the authenticity of these documents?" Kathy nodded gravely. "As far as I've been able to check, they're real. And there's more, Jack. Look at the last page." Jack turned to the end of the document and felt his heart stop. There, in black and white, was a photo of him and Emily leaving a restaurant, hand in hand. The photo was marked with a red X. "They're watching us," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not just that," Kathy added. "They're sending a message. They know what we're doing and they want us to stop." Jack closed the folder, his mind working at full speed. "We have to inform Mr. Parker and Emily. We need a plan." Just then, Jack's phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "Emergency at the office. Come quickly." With his heart racing, Jack apologized to Kathy and rushed to Parker Industries. Upon arriving, he found the main office in a state of controlled chaos. Mr. Parker was on the phone, his face a mask of concern, while Emily coordinated with a team of lawyers. "What's happening?" Jack asked, approaching Emily. "The Securities and Exchange Commission is here," she replied, her voice tense. "They're alleging irregularities in our accounts and want to review all our records." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "This is not a coincidence," he muttered. "Emily, we need to talk in private, now." They found a moment to slip away to an empty conference room. There, Jack told Emily about his meeting with Kathy and the documents she had received. "They're trying to silence us," Jack concluded. "First with veiled threats, and now with this surprise audit." Emily collapsed into a chair, the weight of the situation falling on her. "What are we going to do, Jack? We've come so far." Jack knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "We're not going to give up, Emily. We've faced challenges before, and we've come out ahead. This time will be no different." She looked at him, finding strength in his determination. "You're right. We need a plan." Over the next few hours, Jack, Emily, and Mr. Parker worked tirelessly, coordinating with their legal team, preparing documents and strategies. Kathy Vega was brought on board to help handle the media aspect of the situation. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the forces opposing them were not idle. In a luxurious penthouse in the city center, a group of powerful men met to discuss how to handle the threat posed by Jack Miller and his allies. "That damn driver has become a real nuisance," growled one of them, a high-ranking politician. "We need to take care of him once and for all." "Patience," advised another, a CEO of a rival corporation. "One false move and we could expose ourselves. We need to be smart about this." While the conspirators plotted, back at Parker Industries, Jack had a sudden idea. "Charlie Rodriguez," he said abruptly, interrupting a discussion about legal strategy. "What about him?" Mr. Parker asked, confused. "He was the one who discovered the irregularities in the data leaked by Laura," Jack explained. "He's a brilliant analyst, and most importantly, he has a deep sense of ethics. He could be the ally we need to unravel this conspiracy. Emily nodded, excited. It's an excellent idea. Plus, his experience in data analysis could be crucial to countering this surprise audit. With Mr. Parker's approval, Jack got in touch with Charlie Rodriguez. The young analyst, excited by the opportunity to continue his fight against corruption, agreed to join the team immediately. The following days were an emotional roller coaster and full of challenges. While the Securities and Exchange Commission scrutinized every detail of Parker Industries' operations, Jack, Emily, and their team worked day and night to prove their innocence and, at the same time, continue to unravel the corruption network that threatened to engulf them. Charlie Rodriguez proved to be an invaluable addition to the team. His ability to analyze large amounts of data and detect hidden patterns provided them with new clues and evidence that strengthened their case. One night, as they worked late at the office, Jack and Emily found themselves alone for a moment. Exhausted but determined, they looked at each other, finding strength in their connection. "You know," Emily said softly, "when all this started, I never imagined it would end up like this, fighting against a massive conspiracy, falling in love with you." Jack took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Life has a curious way of surprising us. But I wouldn't change any of this, Emily. Being here with you, fighting for what's right. It's where I'm meant to be." They leaned towards each other, sharing a tender but passionate kiss full of promise. When they separated, their eyes shone with renewed determination. "We're going to win this, Jack," Emily said fiercely. "Together." "Together," Jack nodded. Little did they know that, while they reaffirmed their mutual commitment and to the cause, their enemies were preparing their boldest and most dangerous move yet. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of Parker Industries, and possibly the entire country's business system, hung by a thread. As the night wore on, Jack and Emily returned to work, not knowing that the next 24 hours would test their love, their integrity, and their determination like never before. The approaching storm promised to be the fiercest they had faced, but they were ready to confront it, hand in hand, heart to heart. Dawn arrived with a deceptive calm. Jack woke up in his small apartment, the sun filtering through the curtains. For a moment, he allowed himself to enjoy the peace of the new day before the reality of their situation hit him again. His phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "Important news. Come to the office as soon as possible." With a sigh, Jack got up and quickly prepared himself. As he drove towards Parker Industries, he couldn't help but notice the unusual number of press vehicles parked near the building. Something big was happening. Upon entering the main office, he encountered a scene of controlled chaos. Mr. Parker was in a heated discussion with a group of lawyers, while Emily frantically coordinated with the public relations team. "What's going on?" Jack asked, approaching Emily. She looked at him, her eyes a mixture of frustration and determination. The Securities and Exchange Commission has issued a preliminary report. They're alleging serious irregularities in our accounts and are recommending the suspension of our operations until a thorough investigation is completed. Jack felt the ground move beneath his feet. "But that's ridiculous. Our accounts are impeccable. Charlie and the team have reviewed everything meticulously." "I know," Emily replied, "but it seems someone has been manipulating the evidence. Look at this." She showed Jack a series of documents that appeared to show suspicious transactions and irregular fund movements. To someone who didn't know the internal details of the company, it would look like damning evidence. "This is a fabrication," Jack muttered, his mind working at full speed. "Someone is trying to frame us." At that moment, Kathy Vega entered the office, her face pale and worried. "Guys, you have to see this," she said, turning on the TV on the wall. On the screen, a news anchor was reading an urgent statement. "Breaking news. The Securities and Exchange Commission has issued an arrest warrant for Alexander Parker, CEO of Parker Industries, and several of his executives, including his daughter Emily Parker and special advisor Jack Miller. They are accused of financial fraud, market manipulation, and obstruction of justice. Authorities are on their way to make the arrests." The silence that fell over the office was deafening. All eyes turned to Mr. Parker, Emily, and Jack. "This is a witch hunt," Mr. Parker growled, his face a mask of contained fury. "They're trying to silence us before we can expose the truth." Jack looked at Emily. Seeing fear and determination fighting in her eyes, he took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're not going to let them win," he said firmly, "and we've come too far to give up now." Charlie Rodriguez, who had been working quietly in a corner, approached the group. "I think I can prove these documents are forgeries," he said, "but I need time." "Time is what we don't have," Kathy replied, looking out the window. "There are police vehicles approaching the building." Mr. Parker made a quick decision. "Jack, Emily, you have to leave. Now. Take Charlie and all the data you can. I'll stay here and face them." "But Dad," Emily began, tears forming in her eyes. "There's no time to argue," Mr. Parker interrupted. "You are our best hope of exposing the truth. I'll delay them as long as I can." Jack felt a lump in his throat. This man, who had taken him in and trusted him, was willing to sacrifice himself for them. "Mr. Parker, we can't leave you." "You can, and you will," Mr. Parker said firmly. "That's an order. Now, go." With heavy hearts, Jack took Emily's hand and, along with Charlie, headed for the emergency exit. Kathy followed closely behind, promising to use her contacts to help them stay hidden. As they descended the fire escape, they heard commotion coming from the lobby. The police had entered the building. "This way," Kathy whispered, guiding them towards a back alley where a car was waiting. Jack helped Emily and Charlie into the vehicle, but before he could get in, Kathy stopped him. "Jack, I need you to give me all the information you have," she said quickly. "I'm going to stay behind and try to handle the situation from here. You need to disappear for a while." Jack nodded, handing her a USB drive containing copies of all the evidence they had gathered. "Be careful, Kathy. This is bigger than we thought." "I know," she replied with a sad smile. "Now go. Save the girl, expose the bad guys, and change the world. You know. The usual." With a final handshake, Jack got into the car. As they drove away from the Parker Industries building, he saw in the rearview mirror how the police entered en masse. His heart clenched at the thought of Mr. Parker facing that storm alone. Emily, seated beside him, had silent tears running down her cheeks. Jack took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We're going to fix this," he promised. "We're going to clear your father's name and expose the truth. No matter what it costs." Emily nodded, squeezing his hand. "Together," she whispered. Charlie, from the back seat, spoke up. "I have an idea of where to start, but we'll need help." As the car drove away from the city, Jack looked at his companions. They were fugitives now, pursued by the very forces sworn to protect the law, but in their eyes he saw determination, courage, and hope. The final battle had begun. Against all odds, this unlikely trio, a former driver turned whistleblower, the heiress to a business empire, and a brilliant data analyst, had become the last line of defense against a conspiracy that threatened to undermine the very foundations of justice and integrity in the business world. As the car moved away from the city, heading into the uncertainty of their new life as fugitives, Jack couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and determination. He looked at Emily, whose face showed an iron resolution, despite the tears that still shone in her eyes. "Where are we going?" he finally asked, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the vehicle. Charlie, who had been working frantically on his laptop, looked up. "I have a friend, an ethical hacker, who lives on the outskirts of the city. If anyone can help us unravel this digital corruption network, it's him." Emily nodded. "Good, but we need more than just digital evidence. We need allies, people who can back up our story and stand up to the powers that are after us." Jack thought for a moment and then smiled. "I think I know where to start. Richard Foster." Emily's eyes lit up with understanding. "Of course, his case was the beginning of all this. If we can connect his unjust conviction with the current conspiracy..." "Exactly," Jack confirmed. "Plus, Richard has contacts in the business world that could be useful to us. People who might be willing to risk themselves for the truth." As they plotted their plan, the urban landscape gave way to suburbs and then to open countryside. Night was falling when they finally arrived at an isolated house on the outskirts of a small town. "This is it," Charlie announced. They got out of the car cautiously, aware that they were now wanted fugitives. The door of the house opened before they could knock, revealing a young man with an eccentric appearance, messy hair, and a t-shirt that said, "Hack the Planet." "Charlie, my friend," the young man greeted, hugging Charlie before looking curiously at Jack and Emily. "So these are the famous whistleblowers. Come in quickly. It's not safe outside." Once inside, the hacker, who introduced himself as Alex, led them to a basement converted into an impressive technological operations center. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said with a smile. "Now, tell me everything." Over the next few hours, Jack, Emily, and Charlie brought Alex up to speed on the situation. They showed him the evidence they had, explained the connections they had discovered, and detailed the magnitude of the conspiracy they were facing. Alex listened attentively, his fingers flying over several keyboards as he processed the information. "This is big, friends," he finally said. "Much bigger than you imagine. But I think I can help." They worked tirelessly throughout the night. Alex used his skills to penetrate supposedly secure systems, revealing hidden layers of corruption and manipulation. Charlie analyzed the data at a dizzying speed, finding patterns and connections that had previously gone unnoticed. Meanwhile, Jack and Emily focused on the broader strategy. They contacted Richard Foster, who immediately offered to help in any way he could. They also got in touch with Kathy Vega, who provided them with crucial updates on the situation in the city. As dawn broke, the group gathered around the kitchen table, exhausted but exultant. "We've got it," Alex announced, showing them a complex network of connections on his screen. "We've mapped out the entire structure of the conspiracy. Politicians, judges, CEOs, it's all here." Emily studied the information with critical eyes. "This is incredible. But how do we make it public? They'll brand us as liars or crazy if we just publish it." Jacket, who had been thoughtful, spoke up. "We need a master stroke, something they can't ignore or easily discredit." It was then that Charlie had a brilliant idea. "What if we hacked the stock exchange?" Everyone looked at him in surprise. "Think about it," he continued excitedly. "If we can manipulate the stocks of the companies involved in the conspiracy, even if just for a few minutes, we'd create enough chaos for everyone to pay attention. Then we reveal all the information at once." Alex smiled broadly. "It's risky, possibly illegal, but brilliant. It could work." Jack looked at Emily, seeking her approval. She hesitated for a moment, aware of the ethical implications of what they were considering, but then, thinking of her father facing false charges, of the injustice they had suffered, she nodded with determination. "Let's do it," she said. "It's time for the world to know the truth." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. While Alex and Charlie worked on the technical aspect of the plan, Jack and Emily coordinated with their allies. Richard Foster mobilized his contacts in the business world, preparing them for the moment of truth. Kathy Vega organized a network of trusted journalists ready to spread the story as soon as it went public. Finally, the day arrived. The group gathered in front of the screens, tense but determined. "Is everyone ready?" Jack asked, looking at each of his companions. Emily took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Together," she whispered. Alex cracked his knuckles. "Let the show begin." With a click, the plan was set in motion. The screens erupted in a frenzy of activity as the stocks of the companies involved in the conspiracy began to fluctuate wildly. "Phase 1 completed," Charlie announced after a few tense minutes. "The financial world is in chaos." "Good," said Jack. "Now, Phase 2, release all the information." With another click, gigabytes of incriminating data flooded the internet. Websites, social media, news servers. Everything was inundated with irrefutable evidence of the largest corporate conspiracy in the country's history. Emily's phone rang. It was Kathy Vega. "It's working," the journalist said, her voice full of excitement. "All the media are covering the story. It's a media earthquake." As they watched the news in real time, they saw how the world they knew began to transform. Corrupt politicians were resigning en masse, CEOs were being arrested, judges were facing investigations, and amidst all the chaos, one piece of news stood out above the rest. Alexander Parker, CEO of Parker Industries, exonerated of all charges. Authorities admit fabrication of evidence. Emily let out a sob of relief, hugging Jack tightly. They had done it. They had changed the course of history. But their battle was not over yet. Now came the hardest part, rebuilding a broken system and ensuring that something like this never happened again. Jack looked at his companions, at this unlikely team that had achieved the impossible. "Ready for the next phase?" he asked with a smile. The unanimous answer was a resounding yes. The revolution had just begun, and they were at the center of it all. 6 months had passed since the day Jack, Emily, and their team had shaken the foundations of the business and political world. The initial storm had subsided, but the shockwaves were still felt in every corner of society. Jack found himself standing in front of the window of his new office at Parker Industries, observing the city that had changed so much. The streets bustled with activity, but there was something different in the air, a sense of renewal and hope. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Emily, as beautiful and determined as ever. "Ready for the meeting?" she asked, approaching to give him a quick kiss. Jack smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. Ready as always. Together, they headed to the boardroom, where Mr. Parker, Richard Foster, Charlie, Kathy Vega, and several other allies were waiting for them. This wasn't an ordinary business meeting. It was the Ethics and Transparency Committee they had formed to oversee not only Parker Industries, but to advise other companies and the government on implementing ethical business practices. "Welcome, everyone," Mr. Parker began, his voice laden with fatherly pride as he looked at his daughter and Jack. "We've come a long way, but our work is far from over." Richard Foster, fully exonerated and reinstated as a respected figure in the business world, took the floor. "The change we've initiated is significant, but fragile. We must remain vigilant." Charlie, now head of Parker Industries' Data Analysis Department, presented his latest findings. "We've detected some attempts to return to old practices in certain sectors, nothing big yet, but we must be alert." The discussion that followed was intense but constructive. Plans were drawn up, strategies refined, and new objectives established. This was the new normal, a constant struggle to maintain integrity in a world that always sought the easy path to profit. When the meeting ended, Jack and Emily stayed behind, watching as the others left the room. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up like this?" Emily asked, a playful smile on her lips. Jack let out a soft laugh. "Not even in my wildest dreams. From driver to... what am I now? Corporate crusader. You're a hero," Emily said seriously. "My hero." They looked into each other's eyes, the entire story of their unlikely journey reflected in that gaze. From that day when Jack had interrupted a meeting to expose the truth, to their flight as fugitives, and finally their triumph against all odds. "You know," said Jack, taking Emily's hands in his, "with everything that's happened, we never had the chance to do things the traditional way." Emily arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Jack took a deep breath and, to Emily's surprise, got down on one knee in front of her. "Emily Parker, you've been my partner in the craziest of adventures, my anchor in the storm, and the light that guides me towards a better future. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Emily's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes," she responded, pulling Jack up for a passionate kiss. Mr. Parker, who had returned to the room without them noticing, softly cleared his throat. The couple separated, blushing but smiling. "I suppose this calls for a celebration," said Mr. Parker, his eyes shining with emotion. "After all, it's not every day my daughter gets engaged to the man who saved our company and changed the world." The three shared a laugh, the weight of the past months finally lifting from their shoulders. That night, on the rooftop of Parker Industries, an intimate engagement party was held. Friends, family, and allies gathered to celebrate not only Jack and Emily's love, but also the triumph of good over evil, of integrity over corruption. As Jack observed his loved ones celebrating, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Somehow, that disillusioned young man who had fled the financial world had found his way back, not only to redeem himself, but to redeem an entire system. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges and obstacles to overcome, but with Emily by his side and surrounded by loyal and determined allies, Jack knew they could face anything fate had in store for them. As the sun set over the city, bathing the party in a golden glow, Jack raised his glass. "To a new dawn," he toasted. "To a new dawn," everyone responded in unison. And so, with love in his heart and determination in his spirit, Jack Miller looked towards the horizon, ready to write the next chapter of his extraordinary story. A story that had begun with a simple driver and had ended up changing the world.